If a charming stranger walked up to you today and slowly rewired how you define reality, how long before you would willingly drink poison for them? On November 18, 1978, in a remote jungle clearing in Guyana, 918 people lay dead in the mud. 300 of them were children. They didn't die from a sudden military raid. They didn't fall victim to an exotic tropical disease. They stood in an orderly line, parents holding infants, and willingly drank a punch laced with cyanide. For decades, the world dismissed them as a group of brainwashed religious fanatics. But when you unlock the secret audio archives recorded inside that camp, a far more terrifying, dark psychological reality emerges. These were normal, educated, highly idealistic American citizens, doctors, nurses, students, and families. They didn't lose their minds. Their minds were systematically stolen, piece by piece, using a masterclass in psychological warfare. But the ultimate deception didn't start in a dark jungle. It began in the bright, progressive streets of California. In the late 1960s, a man named Jim Jones founded the People's Temple. He didn't look like a typical cult leader. He wore sharp suits, stylish sunglasses, and preached a message of absolute racial equality, free healthcare, and socialist paradise. To an America fractured by the Vietnam War and deep racial riots, Jones felt like a savior. He was publicly endorsed by top politicians, mayors, and governors. He was a champion of the oppressed. Think about the psychological trap being set. When an entire society tells you a man is a saint, your critical thinking centers lower their guard. You don't look for a monster behind a smile approved by the government. But behind the humanitarian facade, Jones was obsessed with absolute control. He began implementing a classic dark psychology tactic: isolation from support systems. Members were subtly encouraged to sell their homes and donate all their money to the temple. This wasn't just greed. It was a calculated psychological move. If you own nothing, you have nowhere to run. Your survival is now entirely dependent on the group.
Then came the systematic destruction of identity. Members were forced to attend marathon loyalty sessions that lasted through the night. Sleep deprivation alters human brain chemistry, mimicking the symptoms of a low-grade psychosis. In this exhausted state, Jones introduced public confessions. If a member had a doubtful thought about the temple, they were forced to admit it on stage, followed by public humiliation or beatings. Why didn't they leave? Why didn't they walk out the front door? Because Jones had introduced the most powerful psychological glue known to science: cognitive dissonance. If you have already given away your life savings, alienated your relatives, and stood on a stage watching your friends get beaten while you clapped, your brain cannot accept that you did it for a fraud. To protect your own ego, you choose to believe the lie even harder. But by 1977, investigative journalists began digging into the temple's financial abuses and hidden violence. Sensing the walls closing in, Jones executed his master plan. He convinced nearly 1,000 followers to flee the United States overnight, moving to a remote plot of land deep inside the South American jungle of Guyana. He called it Jonestown. Imagine arriving in a dense, hostile rainforest, miles from civilization, with your passport confiscated at the gate. The progressive paradise they were promised was actually a high-security forced labor camp. The psychological manipulation was about to evolve into pure terror. Jones set up massive loudspeakers across the entire clearing. His voice played 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even while they slept. There was no silence. There was no private thought. He fed them constant manufactured paranoia. He told them that the U.S. government was building concentration camps for minorities, and that invisible Nazi death squads were roaming the jungle, waiting to torture their children if they ever left the perimeter. This is the peak of mass gaslighting. When you control all external data, you can manufacture a completely fake universe of fear. Then the psychological rehearsals began. Long before the final day, Jones began waking his followers up in the middle of the night with emergency sirens. He called these white nights. The tired, terrified colonists would gather under a large open-air pavilion. Jones would hand them small cups of liquid and tell them it was poison, testing their ultimate loyalty. They would drink it, wait to die, and when nothing happened, Jones would laugh and say it was just a test of their faith. Psychologically, this diffused the natural human survival instinct. By turning mass suicide into a routine, repetitive drill, he stripped away the brain's natural panic response to the concept of death. But the fragile illusion collapsed on November 17, 1978. A concerned U.S. congressman named Leo Ryan arrived at Jonestown with a television crew to investigate reports of citizens being held against their will. Initially, the colonists smiled for the cameras, dancing and singing under the pavilion, but as the night progressed, secret notes were slipped into the hands of the journalists. One note read, "Help us get out of here." A small group of defectors chose to break the psychological spell, begging the congressman to take them back to America. The next afternoon, as Congressman Ryan and the defectors were boarding rescue planes at a nearby jungle airstrip, Jones' armed security forces drove up on a tractor and opened fire. The congressman, 3 journalists, and 1 defector were brutally executed. The bridge back to the civilized world was completely burned. Back at the pavilion, Jim Jones called his final white night. But this time, it wasn't a drill. Now, let us look at the darkest mystery hidden within the audio tapes of that final hour. For years, the public narrative claimed this was a mass suicide, but the Jonestown death tape, a real, chilling audio recording found by investigators, reveals a horrific contradiction. As Jones sits at the microphone, calmly explaining that they must commit a revolutionary suicide to protect their dignity from the U.S. government, a single voice rises up to challenge him. A woman named Christine Miller speaks up. On the tape, you can hear her arguing rationally, suggesting they escape to Cuba or Russia instead of dying. Why didn't the crowd back her up? Why did they shout her down? Because of social proof under extreme duress. When individuals are terrified and confused, they look to the behavior of those around them. The guards were armed with rifles circling the pavilion. Jones' inner circle began crying out in religious ecstasy, praising his wisdom. The collective pressure crushed individual thought. Then the infants were brought to the front. The poison was injected directly down the throats of the children using plastic syringes. The psychological tape records the agonizing screams of hundreds of children echoing through the jungle. Once the parents watched their own children die, their psychological will to live evaporated. They drank the poison because their future had already been erased right in front of their eyes. When the Guyanese military arrived the next morning, they expected to find a battlefield. Instead, they found an eerie, perfectly silent carpet of bodies lying face down, arms wrapped around one another.
Jim Jones was found dead on the pavilion stage with a single shot wound to the head. He didn't drink his own poison. He chose a quick, painless exit, leaving his followers to choke to death in the dirt.
Today, Jonestown is studied as the ultimate warning of psychological vulnerability. But a final, highly classified anomaly remains unaddressed. The chief pathologist who examined the bodies on site, Dr. Leslie Mutu, testified under oath that the vast majority of the adult bodies had fresh needle puncture marks between their shoulder blades. This means they didn't drink the poison willingly. They were held down and forcibly injected by armed guards. Was Jonestown truly a tragedy of mass religious hysteria, or was it a massive, industrial-scale prison execution hidden behind a cult leader's script? The files have been sealed for decades, leaving us to confront a terrifying truth about the human mind. The people who died in Jonestown weren't monsters, and they weren't crazy. They were people just like you who wanted a better world but trusted the wrong voice to show them the way. Consider the psychological landscape of the world you live in right now. The echo chambers of social media, the charismatic leaders promising perfect answers to complex crises, the subtle pressure to alienate friends who disagree with your political loops. If a modern master of gaslighting stepped into your life tomorrow, wrapping their control inside a message of peace and security, how long before you handed them the keys to your reality? Are your thoughts truly your own? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Who was the real victim at Jonestown?